Hello. How's everybody doing? Got that nice belly full of food, hopefully, and ready to listen to a talk about discrete log contracts. And so let's just start off with a raise of hands. How many people have heard of DLCs before? Okay, quite a few people. How many people have tried DLCs before? Quite a few less people. So I got to start off the talk with a little bit of shilling. We're doing some DLC demos right after this talk by the big moon in the expo hall in the esports gaming arena. If this stuff interests you that we're talking about today, come get some hands-on experience with it, bring some sats, bring an address that we can send the payout to for a DLC, and a fun bet idea. And what we're going to talk about here today on this panel is kind of what DLCs are, what problems do they solve, and how they actually work. So kind of like kicking us off here, I want to start with introductions. Taj, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Taj Dryja. I've been working on Bitcoin for a long time. I invented the Lightning Network with Joseph Poon back in 2015, and from that, also wrote the paper Discrete Log Contracts a couple of years after that, and sort of introduced this way to do smart contracts on Bitcoin. And I'm actually mostly working on U3XO, a different new Bitcoin thing, but today we're talking about DLCs, and so I'm definitely really excited to see that people are actually starting to use it and stuff, so it's great.
Tony.
Cool.
Hey everyone, I'm Tony. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Atomic Finance. So we're a Toronto-based startup, super early stage still, but we're building a mobile app for folks to be able to put their Bitcoin to work and earn a yield potentially on their Bitcoin using options-based strategies that are built on top of DLCs, which we're going to talk more about later today. I started in the space 2017. I actually started on the Ethereum space and then decided to pivot and focus on the Bitcoin side of things later on, and found out that, hey, there's actually all this sort of cool functionality that we can build natively, cool products, cool applications that we can build natively on Bitcoin, so why not just do it natively on Bitcoin and focus there and build products for Bitcoiners. So yeah, that's a quick intro from me.
Hell yeah. I'm Ben. I worked with Chris at SureBits for about 2 years doing DLC stuff, and I do a lot now in my free time too. And it helps build a DLC wallet there and Crystal Bowl or Oracle software. Me and Joseph Moon are working on a SDK for mobile wallet DLC stuff, but all work in progress stuff there.
I'm going to steal a line from Ben on the end here and say, Taj is probably responsible for 2 inventions that employ a lot of people in this room, Lightning Network and discrete log contracts. Can I get a raise of hands if you have employment because of this man here?
Yeah, the intent is not job creation. Ideally, Bitcoin would be job destruction. Everyone could just hang out and not have to work, but sorry about that, yeah. U3XO, no, there's 4 people.
Maybe in 3 or 4 years, I guess, right?
Yeah,
it takes a little while for it to catch on.
But yeah, there's more people working on that now too, so. Okay, sorry.
Back to kind of discrete log contracts. It's why is this an important problem to be solving in the first place? We hear about DeFi over in other blockchain ecosystems, and Tony, I'm going to kick this over to you. Why this is a problem we should be solving in the Bitcoin world?
Yeah, the way we look at it, DLCs is a very interesting way to build some really cool products and primitives, decentralized finance, DeFi products for Bitcoin. And the reason that our team thinks about it and why we think it's necessary to kind of explore ways to build Bitcoin DeFi is twofold. Well, I'll break it down into obviously DeFi consists of decentralized and finance. So why are both of those parts necessary on Bitcoin? The financial part I think is a bit more obvious. Basically, kind of when you look at some of the greatest assets or currencies around the world, you notice that there's a very robust and ecosystem of financial tools around them. And I think part of Bitcoin's maturation process as a financial asset, as a currency, as a store of value, is that there's going to be more and more financial tools that are built on top of Bitcoin. And I think that financial tools are just going to be a large part of that maturation process. In terms of the decentralized part of things, I think that's where it starts to get a bit more interesting. Right now, the way that we look at it, there's kind of a big gap or dichotomy between Bitcoin finance and Bitcoin, the asset today. Bitcoin, the asset, as we all know, censorship resistant, verifiable, transparent, all that jazz. But the issue is, when we look at a lot of Bitcoin finance tools that are available today, it's kind of the opposite, right? You kind of hand over your coins to them, then you don't know really what happens after the fact. You can't really verify much. And it even kind of removes the provable scarcity aspect of Bitcoin to some degree because of potential, of rehypothecation and all that kind of stuff. And so that's why we think that it's very necessary to build kind of sound financial tools or decentralized financial tools that match, for the most part, match Bitcoin's aspects in terms of provable scarcity, in terms of verifiability, transparency, all that kind of stuff. And we think that that's, we don't want to replicate some of the same issues that we see in the fiat world, happen on Bitcoin. And so why not build sound financial tools from the ground up that also carry most of Bitcoin's best traits? That's kind of why we are really kind of strong believers in the need to build Bitcoin DeFi, the need to build sound financial tools for sound money natively here on Bitcoin.
So I think that's like a good segue into why we haven't seen as much development for these tools on Bitcoin. And a question I have for you, Taj, is why is it so hard to build things on Bitcoin? Do you think it's a cultural issue that Bitcoiners don't want this, or do you think it's a technical issue of they want it, but it's really freaking hard and it's not as easy as just deploying a smart contract somewhere?
Right. So the sort of interesting thing is the thing that eventually became discrete log contracts was someone I knew, Joey Zhu, back in San Francisco, was like, oh, I'm working on Ethereum. I'm like, what's that? He explained the idea of Ethereum. This is way before their whole crowd sale. And I was like, can't you do that on Bitcoin? And it's like, no, you can't. I'm like, I wonder, there's probably a way. And so yes, one of the aspects is it's easier, right? The Ethereum ecosystem has all these tools and you can just write whatever crazy thing you want and lose $600 million of other people's money and
Theoretically.
And it is more difficult in Bitcoin, but I do think there are some technical things that are quite different. Where if you actually look in Ethereum, what people are spending a lot of gas and using it for, a lot of it's discovery. And so what we have with discrete log contracts, and people have worked on it a lot, it's contract execution, and you have all this security. It's okay, and we always talk about Alice and Bob. It's okay, Alice and Bob, Alice is long Bitcoin, Bob is short Bitcoin, so Bob has sort of something like a stable coin, and Alice has this super volatile Bitcoin because she thinks it's gonna go up, and that's a good trade. They both wanna do this, and we have all these really secure ways to make that happen. But we start with Alice and Bob, and really we need to start with Alice doesn't know Bob. Nobody knows anything. And you need an order book, you need a marketplace. And I think that is what you sort of see being one of the use cases. One of the things Ethereum does have that is, on the one hand, horrible because it's enormous and enormously efficient for someone to say, hey, I'm interested in going long this asset. Anyone want, or I have an order, I want to buy something for this amount. I changed it in my mind, I cancel, right? Because I know that in Wall Street, it's something like 100 to 1, total number of orders that go into a market versus order execution, right? Most people put in orders and then cancel them. And so you sort of see that recorded for all time in Ethereum, where it's all these orders and cancellations, and it's very inefficient, but people can find each other. And that's one of the hard parts that is sort of still unsolved in Bitcoin land, where same with coin joins, same with a lot of these other protocols. It's well, yeah, if you can find your counterparty, we know how to do these things. But finding each other in this decentralized, trustless way is still something of an open question. So I think that's one of the big hurdles left.
And I 100% agree with that and think that's kind of one of the big unknown problems that we need to solve in the Bitcoin ecosystem is to make that work with the UTXO model. And then, what I call these things is censorship-resistant financial markets rather than just kind of censorship-resistant money that we have at the moment. And that's something that I think other blockchain ecosystems are kicking our butt at just by the sheer fact that it's possible there, and
but
it's not even possible.
You can see why Bitcoin people don't want it, because it's we don't want hundreds of gigabytes of people trying to find each other recorded for all time that you have to validate, right? It's like, no, don't, that should be offline. That doesn't need to be on the blockchain, but it doesn't need to be somewhere that's decentralized. And so, you know, I sort of have, actually this conference started saying, we need a layer 2 mempool, right? Like, so, I don't know if that's the cool catchphrase, but like, yeah, we have the mempool.
Make it happen, Twitter.
Yeah. We have this mempool where things are sort of floating around and miners grab stuff and make blocks and make the blockchain. And the mempool is a huge, I mean, people have been talking, you know, so other people today have been talking about, you know, the open source work on the mempool. It's super important and difficult. We don't really have a layer 2 mempool. We don't, you know, if you're trying to find counterparties on Lightning, if you're trying to do these things, there's all these sort of sporadic peer-to-peer interactions which work, but there isn't, what's nice is like there's the mempool and we can sort of all put stuff together. So we don't quite have that as like a layer 2 thing, but that's sort of still an open question. And there's lots of cool ideas about that.
Do you have anything in the works to solve that? Just ask. Just kidding.
It's a question we keep talking about, but we don't like, oh, silver burl, not yet. Yeah, maybe.
I think that's a really fair characterization. It's something I'd like to say to the audience. It's a problem we're solving, and where does liquidity aggregate, and where can you go find where can Alice and Bob go to match each other in a decentralized way, so we don't have this like regulatory pressure of depositing your coins on a centralized exchange, and then they of course are subject to the whims of whatever jurisdiction they're in. And I think Bitcoiners should take the problem more seriously. But in terms of like what we can do with DLCs, assuming that Alice and Bob have found each other already, can we just like enumerate some of the use cases of what types of contracts we can do? Ben, do you maybe want to take that?
I mean, like it's cool. You can do almost anything. Like they have the options contracts where you're betting on the price of Bitcoin. I also built a game where you just bet on Super Smash Bros. Games. Or you could bet, you guys are doing the thing, how long is Justin Moon's mullet? Like, like you can do like anything. It's super cool.
2:30, be there. How long is Justin Moon's mullet?
So because all you're doing is having Oracle sign a message of what something is. So it could be, the Bitcoin price. It could be the length of a mullet. It could be a Smash Bros. Game. It could be like, what's the coordination of the stars or something. Like it can be almost anything. So it opens up like a million use cases, and you can with that you can make lots of cool stuff. Where instead of just signing what the Bitcoin price, so you could say like, what's the execution of this script, and then make a real actual smart contract that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the most clever things about DLCs is like the scripting is very minimal, and intentionally a lot of information's left off chain. And maybe Ben or Taj, you guys want to speak to kind of how that's advantageous from a privacy and scalability perspective? Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. So today, if you're using Ethereum, you're saying this is everything I'm doing. Here's the exact price I'm trying to buy at. And they have a huge problem where there's miner extracted value, where they just front run all the orders because they know what everyone's trying to do and just make free money. In Bitcoin, or at least in DLCs, you can't do that because all of my contract data is off chain, just between me and my counterparty, just like in a database that we own. And the actual contract is just negotiation between us, and all results is spending from a multi-sig and then spending out of it. That's all anyone can see. So they don't know what we're betting on, if we are even betting, and even your Oracle doesn't know. So they might maybe they see your IP address, pinged the server, and was like, oh, they got the Bitcoin price, but they don't know if you were short or long, how big your bet was, anything like that. So it's extremely private that way. And then since all this is all off chain and just 2 transactions, it's a lot more scalable.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, I guess, a word that we haven't actually defined yet on this talk, but what is an oracle? Does anybody want to take that question?
Tad?
Sure, it's you need a bridge from the real world.
Why can't Bitcoin go and just know what the Bitcoin price is? Why can't Bitcoin know who won the Super Bowl? Why don't we just embed a HTTP client into Bitcoin and have it reach out and figure out how long Justin Moon's mullet is?
Yeah, no, none of these chains, everything needs an oracle because you can't assume consensus on this thing that fundamentally we don't have consensus on, right? What's the temperature outside? Well, where outside? And so you need some kind of entity to just post and say, here, this is the score of the Super Bowl. And you do have to trust that entity. And this is a problem that, I don't know, there's entire altcoins that are entirely devoted to oracles. I don't know what they're doing. But to me, it's always well, you want to minimize, here's this trust needed. And so you want to minimize that, right? Like we can't really get around it, but we want to reduce the power of this oracle as much as possible. So the goal is sort of like, let's make the oracle as oblivious as possible to what's going on. So they report this data, but they don't see what people are doing with it, or they don't see how many contracts are using this or anything like that. So to try to, and also cryptographically, they can't equivocate. They can't say, oh, the Rams won the Super Bowl. No, the Oilers won the Super Bowl. They can't do both at the same time without losing their private keys, which is sort of a nice extra thing. But yeah, it's some entity in the real world, maybe known, maybe anonymous, that reports on real world data. And that report doesn't have to go into the blockchain, and ideally won't, right? So that report influences the blockchain, but can be on a website or something. And so that's sort of my goal is like limit the oracles.
Yeah.
And hopefully discrete log contracts can help do that.
And I think that's such a valuable point about how the data is not going into the blockchain itself. And another property of this is that the way the DLC specification works is this same oracle could be used across different blockchain ecosystems. And we're at a Bitcoin conference today, but it's really nice not to have to have the oracle have a different reputation for the Litecoin blockchain versus the Zcash blockchain versus the Bitcoin blockchain. The same oracle can be used across the entire DLC ecosystem, and you kind of prevent this like fragmentation going on. And also, an oracle can build reputation that way.
And we are like seeing that, like the Link guys announced they're trying to do DLC stuff. So like, it's kind of cool that like the shitcoins are coming and trying to like adopt our stuff, which rarely happens.
Yeah, I mean, it is really cool. Do you have any opinions on what oracles should report on versus not reporting on, or what is the limitations of an oracle? How I think about it is, you should always make sure if you're going to be an oracle in the DLC ecosystem, the event has to be very cut and dry of what happened. And like Taj was kind of hinting at this earlier of like, if what's the temperature outside? You need to define like what the thing that you're going to attest to is very airtight as possible, kind of almost like a legal agreement. Otherwise, you can have ambiguity, and your smart contract execution is only as good as the oracle's input into the smart contract itself. Another thing that we've worked on in the DLC spec is multi-oracle stuff. And I know Ben, you've done a lot of work on that. Do you want to share?
Yeah, it's like what Taj was saying was like, you have to trust this one entity, but it's nice in DLCs we can kind of actually just trust multiple entities and this like, have this like 2 of 3 like multi-sig of oracles where you could do something like, maybe I'm good friends with Chris, but maybe I don't totally trust him on reporting the weather, but I trust all 3 of these guys together. So I say if 2 of the 3 say it's 60 degrees, I get the money, and if one lies, then I'm okay. And so it's a really nice property, and it scales pretty well, or like your contracts on chain is the exact same still. You just need more data off chain, but you're able to like abstract out all these things and kind of protect yourself there if you have multiple oracles.
Yeah, another thing that comes up a lot is like, should oracles be paid? Should they not be paid? Does anyone have any thoughts on the panel about compensation for the services that oracles are providing?
I think that like it depends. Basically, it's an interesting like question, because like, oh, does an oracle being paid open up the door for potential collusion or whatever? But like it's also interesting because maybe oracle should be thought of as a public good or something like that. And so yeah, it's an interesting kind of like discussion topic. I think that if say I'm building a product and I need an oracle with a guaranteed amount of uptime or something like that, or some sort of kind of like minimum level of service, then maybe then it makes sense for me to pay a little bit more to like kind of guarantee that kind of like uptime and stuff like that. But otherwise, like I mean, it's certainly an open question. Curious to hear what Taj and Ben have to say. Yeah.
I mean, I think like the actually operational cost of running an oracle is like basically 0. It's like you post 64 bytes, like when an event happens, that's about it.
Right.
So like all you're doing is making an HTTP request probably to like NFL.com to get the score and then posting it. So they don't totally need to be paid. It is good. Like as an oracle, you want to be paid because who doesn't like getting paid? But it is like, I don't think it's a huge problem of like incentives. Like most likely, like, people will just set up oracles and be like, oh, it just runs on AWS now forever, and they'll assign every game. They don't need to worry about it anymore. And I think like doing things like open source oracles, where like you open source like my NFL oracle that signs every NFL game, then everyone can run this now, and we can all see like, oh, this one's fucking up, he's signing the wrong thing, and then you just switch over to new oracles. Like you don't need to like have all these like super like well defined things. Like let's just have an NFL oracle and everyone runs it.
I think one of I definitely agree. It's not that hard, right? You just sign a message, so it's not like you're a miner or anything. I think it's the one use case I keep coming back to is like the price of Bitcoin, right? People want to bet on that. We see there's all these stable Tether and USDC, and it's just like I'm always very curious at like why people use them, because it seems like a horrible idea, and one day it's just going to get like seized by some government, and then everyone loses everything. But or not, but it's like, well, you can sort of get that action with DLCs, where it's like, okay, I want a constant dollar price contract, and so the Bitcoin price seems very important, and it does feel like oracles possibly in that case would be incentivized from without getting paid. So if you're an exchange, you're Gemini, Kraken, you say, well, if there are people making derivatives contracts based on the price of Bitcoin, I want their price to be our price. And most of the exchanges are very, very close in price, but not always. There can be a little bit of a divergence here and there. And they can say, well, if you are doing these derivatives contracts, we want you to use, Kraken's price, and then that'll make more people want to trade on Kraken because you can sort of net it out. And you're already trusting these exchanges to like hold gazillions of Bitcoin. So trusting them to like say what the last trade price is seems like a much lower ask than that. So that does seem like, it's not happening now, but it could in the future where exchanges want to be oracles and want to get that.
It does happen now. They like Coinbase, I think they do like a oracle for like Ethereum and stuff. So it's not far-fetched for them to do it for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and that would be a fun, so you have the sort of Bitcoin fix where everyone's like, trading on this like very important auction price, and like, okay, here's the price of Bitcoin for the day or something. That'd be cool. And we're starting to see that maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think another like interesting topic here is like whether going back to how do Alice and Bob find each other in a decentralized fashion is very, very hard in the UTXO world, and it can be done in other blockchains, although really inefficiently and with no privacy, basically. So another like idea that I guess I've been thinking about is like, is it important that you retain custody of the Bitcoin while the matching happens, if the matching happens fast? So like imagine I deposit money into Kraken, they do what they're really good at, which is matching buyers and sellers, and they print a Bitcoin transaction that represents the DLC out the back. Does anyone have thoughts on that, or why it's good, why it might be bad? Any hot takes?
And it doesn't bring you the censorship-resistant financial market still, which kind of is the goal here. But it is a like solution. Like, honestly, it should be a spectrum. Like, we can have the most decentralized version where it's like, I don't know, like some like actual peer-to-peer network that we use to negotiate these offers. And you can have the centralized ones where you deposit in the Kraken and spit out a DLC. And you can have things in the middle. So they're all viable. We just kind of need to try them all out and see which one sticks.
Yeah, I mean, I think my thinking is like evolving on this about minimizing the amount of time that somebody else has custody of your Bitcoin. If that's 30 seconds to match a trade, I think that's a pretty acceptable amount of time. If the exchange in question is doing funky business, people will stop depositing money into their exchange almost immediately, and you just got to make sure you're not using that same exchange as the Oracle, and you do end up having some of this censorship resistance too. At least is how I've been thinking about it. Of course, that requires like a large amount of buy-in from the existing exchanges, which are pretty vehemently against adopting any sort of Bitcoin tooling, it seems. But maybe someday.
Another model would be sort of a broker model where, there's one Bob and lots of Alices, and so everyone's like, yeah, that's Bob. Like everyone connects to this one broker, and they're sort of a party to every trade. And Bob doesn't necessarily have to take a position. They could say, well, Alice over here wants to go short Bitcoin, and Alice over here wants to go long Bitcoin. So I sort of net that out.
Well, and I think that's very similar to the atomic finance model, if I'm not mistaken. Tony, do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so basically like how for us, how it works is like basically we do our matching like through an IRC channel, kind of similar to Lightning Pool and stuff like that, or joint markets, right? Basically like kind of just like, users are coming on board on the app. It's very seamless on the front end for them. Just tap a button, but in the back end, what's happening is like, generating an offer message on the IRC channel, and then kind of like matching that up with a market maker on the other side. So it's kind of like very simple, stuff like that. I think like remains to be seen kind of like what, longer term, what the matching stuff will look like, and if we standardize on one thing and stuff like that. But, that's, I guess, an open question once again.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is like really interesting about DLCs is like, we've already talked about contract privacy. So somebody that's a third party can't see what you're betting on without having Alice or Bob reveal that information to them. Another interesting component of DLCs, I think, that's kind of underrated is how it's a dual-funded protocol. It requires Alice and Bob to put in some of their own Bitcoin. And Ben, do you want to speak to just kind of how that sometimes that can have a privacy impact at the blockchain level?
Yeah, so like today, like when chain analysis companies like try to figure out like what this transaction is, they generally give the assumption that all the inputs in the transaction belong to the same person. So, but with DLCs, you're going to have you and your counterparty's inputs in there. So you're going to break that heuristic, and if they don't know this is DLC, then they might accidentally link your two wallets together, and now you guys screwed a chain analysis. So good job. And it's really nice, and it's great too because it just goes in, like we're sending Bitcoin to a multisig and then out. So this is the exact same on-chain footprint as like a dual-funded Lightning channel. And so you get this really nice privacy where it doesn't even look like a DLC always. It could just be like, and then once we have Taproot as well, it just looks like a normal payment. So it has like really nice benefits there.
Yeah, I mean, and I think any time you can obscure that transaction graph, it again makes the analysis companies' jobs harder, and that should be any sort of dual-funded protocol has that property, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And so we should all be encouraging dual-funded Lightning channels, things like DLCs, especially if you're a privacy advocate and like really deeply care about that stuff. So you make the heuristics that these companies use a little bit harder to analyze where coins are going and why they're going there. But Ben, you also brought up Taproot, the new upgrade to the Bitcoin network that got shipped in November of 2021 or something like that. Could you speak to how DLCs might evolve, or maybe Taj, you want to chime in there too, of how DLCs can evolve in a Taproot world? Maybe start with Taj.
Sure, yeah, Taproot, I mean, I can say Taproot, but then there's also a bunch of other changes people have been talking about, especially in the last couple months on like mailing lists, where Taproot can help a bit with privacy, and also the fact that Taproot can sort of build these trees of potential spending paths in a single output script will let you, have some more on-chain efficiency as well. But there's also other things that we've been looking at that aren't something that Bitcoin supports now. And it's like, hey, if you had something like SigHash any prevout, which is something that people have been looking at for years, and like, hey, you could do different Lightning Network style stuff like L2 with this. You could also make DLCs more transferable. So you could sort of pre-sign transfer. One of the issues with DLCs is once you're in a contract, if your counterparty's gone, you're stuck in that contract, right, until it expires. But if you had some other different opcodes as well, you could have it so that you could transfer it to someone else without your counterparty being online, because basically your counterparty pre-signs off on any transfer. Also with CTV, there's ways to increase the efficiency as well. And then there's also Louis Fournier's post a few months ago about like changing the signature thing completely, and I was like, wow, that's really, really cool, because I don't really know what we do with it. It doesn't actually make it that much smaller, but it just seems like a very powerful step towards something else. So there's definitely lots of tools that aren't out yet, but we're looking at and may someday in the future come into Bitcoin that would allow even more powerful discrete log contract type of things.
I mean, I think one of the big things is Schnorr signatures included in the Taproot upgrade too. And Ben, do you want to speak to how Schnorr changes DLCs on chain and maybe off chain as well?
Yeah, like the beauty of like Schnorr is it lets you do additive things. And so today when you're doing like a multi-sig on chain, it's very obvious. Like 2 of 2 multi-sig, everyone can see it. With Taproot, you can completely hide that, and you just do like your multi-sig off chain with these signatures. So today, like when you do DLC, you're funding this 2 of 2 multi-sig. So everyone sees that like, oh, this is obviously the DLC output, and these are the 2 change outputs. With Taproot, they'd all look like the exact same address, and so you couldn't tell what's going on. And when you close it as well, it's just going to look like a normal spend, not a multi-sig spend. So it gives you this really nice privacy of hiding exactly what's going on, because now like your DLC is going to look the exact same as just a normal like spend from your Blue Wallet or something. So you can't really tell anymore what's going on, and it's going to really hurt these like chain analysis companies that are trying to figure out like they'll see like a 2 of 2 multi-sig, they're like, okay, this is a special transaction, we can tag this, like, maybe this doesn't follow the common input heuristic. But now, if they all look the same, they can't do that. They're like, oh, this is just a transaction, we got to figure it out.
Yeah, to Taj's point about CTV, I think super exciting stuff potentially for DLCs, just from a UI UX perspective. Right now maybe it takes, for a typical options contract in DLCs, takes like, have to sit around for about 60 seconds to generate all the signatures and all that kind of stuff. We try to make it fun on the app, but like, it's, who has time to wait 60 seconds, right? So like, if that comes into play, if CTV comes on board, then we can shorten that time dramatically to say like a couple seconds or something like that, right? Which would be amazing from a UI UX perspective and just make things simpler moving forward.
And that's a really good point. And maybe Taj, do you want to speak to like, why is there such a huge computational load that comes with DLCs?
Yeah.
Like,
So the basic thing of how DLCs work, which is kind of dumb, is you pre-compute every single possible thing that can happen. So if it's who wins the Super Bowl, well that's just one or the other. But if it's what's the score of the Super Bowl, well there could be thousands of different possible scores, and what's the price of Bitcoin? Well, how much do you round it to? So there's potentially many thousands of possible outcomes, and instead of having the blockchain figure out what happens, the idea is we figure out every possible thing that can happen, store it between Alice and Bob, and then only one thing goes on the blockchain. So there's this trade-off of how much the Alice and Bob are doing work, how much the sort of end users are storing and doing work, versus how much the blockchain stores. And one of the things I sort of ask, and it's kind of philosophical, like, if you can save 1 byte on the blockchain, how many bytes would you be willing to store on your local computer? Like a kilobyte, a megabyte, a gigabyte, right? Because it's hard to, like, there's no right answer, right? But data on the blockchain is very, it feels heavy. It's like, man, I'm putting something on the blockchain. This thing's going to be around for maybe longer than I am, and everyone's going to have to validate it and download it and store it. And like, I want to really minimize that. And so the trade-off with DLC is, it's, I don't know, 1,000 to 1, whatever. You're having a constant size on-chain transaction and potentially quite large amount of data between the 2 parties that never sees the chain. And so I generally think that's good, but there are trade-offs, right? Maybe it's too slow, and like, hey, if we can just put another 20 or 30 bytes on chain, we can take this 60 seconds down to like 1 second. That could be useful, And there's a market, like fees and stuff. So that's sort of one of the big trade-offs we're looking at, and that OpsCTV could give different knobs to change as well there.
Yeah, I just realized you've made 2 protocols now that have like these infinite growing, well, no, I guess DLCs, it's not infinite growing storage requirements, but Lightning, until you close your channel, I guess you got to keep adding to the database there.
Right, but only one thing goes, I mean, they're very simple, the DLC definitely came out of the research and the work on Lightning Network. And they, the scripts are the same or were, and, so they're very similar in that you want to put as much data as you can off chain. And sometimes that means you actually have scaling issues on your single computer. But to me, like a scaling issue on your computer is better than a scaling issue for the whole entire network.
Yeah, and I think that's such a, maybe you're the originator of this like kind of philosophical design point that I also hold of like just like keep as much off the blockchain as possible. It's better for scalability of the blockchain. It's better for privacy of the participants of the the contract in question on the blockchain. And consumer hardware does keep getting better and better, although we keep doing more intricate things with that consumer hardware. Does anyone else have an opinion on on-chain stuff versus off-chain stuff?
I mean, I think a funny thing to bring up is like when we were developing the DLC wallet at SharedBits, like when we first started out, it's like highly unoptimized, and we tried to do like a 3 of 5 like Oracle bet on the Bitcoin price. It had like 1 million outcomes or something, and like me and Chris, like we click like go, and both our computers crash, and we text each other like, "Did you die too?" And like, yeah, so like it is a hard problem to solve, and we added a lot of optimizations and stuff. Now we're able to do it in like a couple seconds. But we have like high-end developer laptops. Like Atomic Finance is on your iPhone, so it's like this doesn't have this insane chip in memory that you can do it all. And it does blow up a lot of data. Like I know a couple of them we did where we didn't put in like rounding, and we'd have like 80 megabyte like databases for one contract that we're just like testing with, and it wouldn't like the networking would like screw up sometimes, and it's just a hard problem. So it is like a nice thing that like if we do get CTV is a huge thing, because instead of you negotiate all these transactions, all you do is just basically both produce the same address, and if you both get the same result, you're like cool, and you send to it, and now your DLC set up. So it saves a lot of that bandwidth, which is really nice, especially for like places that like if you're doing like over Tor where it's very slow and stuff like that, or if you're just somewhere in like if you're in like Nigeria or something and don't have 5G internet, like it's a big benefit.
Yeah, and just another a plug in there. It's like we ship our SharedBits wallet on the Raspberry Pis on Umbrel, and that's like again where there's a lot of sensitivity to performance, because on low resource devices, which I think most Bitcoin applications strive to be deployed on, this signature computation does become sometimes prohibitive for certain types of contracts that people want to use. My understanding of moving to Taproot and Schnorr is that computation does get quicker, which is another benefit of moving to Schnorr, but we're not quite there in the DLC specification. We're waiting on us getting Taproot rolled out and deployed in the ecosystem before we can take advantage of that.
And the like Fournier, changing the signature, the Oracle signature to, we need a term for it, but not a signature at all, where it's basically I plus KX. That would probably be 1,000 times faster for the end users, or something on the order of 1,000, like point multiplication versus addition, 1,000-ish times faster. So that would be a huge improvement, and it's still not 100% sure it's secure, because it's just like a post on a mailing list, and you're like, that works, I think, okay. So there's still enormous amounts of things to improve and research in this space, which is really exciting.
Another, I guess, going back to the Oracle questions, something that we've been talking about a lot lately is Oracle's attesting to something that's globally known, such as the Super Bowl, or what the weather is outside, or what the price of Bitcoin is on an exchange. There is globally knowable answers to that, versus attesting to something that maybe isn't globally known but can be used to give a better user experience, like maybe how much money specifically Alice and Bob receive in a very specific trade, rather than attesting to what the Bitcoin price is. Does anybody have any thoughts there on if that warps Oracle incentives at all, or any ideas on that?
And it kind of talks like you're thinking of doing escrow with DLCs, and I think that is a nice use case where instead of having the escrow be part of your transaction, a 2 of 3 multisig, they're not just an Oracle and they don't know your transaction, so you get some privacy. It probably helps them with regulations and stuff. But it is kind of weird, because if they lie, you'd be like, look, they lied. It'd be you can't really totally prove it, because it's not a public event of did the package come to my house or not. So it kind of skews the incentives, but I still think it's a good use case. DLCs have real nice benefits over bringing third parties into your transactions. So I think it's a great way to do it still.
And another a conversation I had in the last month or two was with a guy that runs a pretty big Bitcoin company, and how DLCs could be used for reoccurring subscriptions too, where you roll the subscription over every month, and the Oracle pulls the money almost like you're drawing down a Bitcoin address like a bank account, and you can cancel the subscription at any time by double spending the transaction. The feedback that I've got from that idea on the mailing list is use nlock time, and I think that's a fair rebuttal. I still think there's some non-interactivity benefits maybe, but does anyone have any thoughts on just kind of out of the box Oracle ideas that don't necessarily tie directly to betting applications necessarily, or can we take this Oracle specification even further in the DLC ecosystem to enable more use cases on Bitcoin, and have Bitcoin and Oracles take over everything?
it's a pretty general protocol, but it does seem like, yeah, ideally, if this is like a public thing and the oracles can't really lie that easily because, and they don't know who's using the data. Because if you're sort of saying, hey, this is between Alice and Bob, you need to check whether I got my groceries delivered, the oracle already knows who's going to use this data. And so you've sort of lost a lot of that privacy. So, it doesn't help as much there, but it could be used in these things. And there are companies like asking, but it's sort of like, sometimes you lose a little bit of the purpose of it, but a lot of times you still, if the software is there, people will probably use it for that as well.
Yeah. I think we're pretty much out of time, guys. Thank you for coming out. If we're doing DLC demos again at 2:30 at the Expo Hall, far left back corner by the big moon, we're giving away these shirts if you manage to get through a DLC setup. So if you want some Shredbit swag with company on the front, the math on the back, come check us out. And otherwise, thanks for being a great audience.